All right. Welcome to Elevate Your Grind, brought to you by the Cannabis Lab. This is a very, very, very special episode for me. I'm extremely excited. When Robert and I decided to start this podcast, this was probably the first name that I had down as an interview. Brady Cobb, I love you. Maybe you're my favorite operator on the show, but please welcome Codie Sanchez.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Awesome. So again, we are recording live at the Benzinga conference. Codie, you are at every single conference in the industry. I think one of the coolest things about you is, you're one of those people kind of like, and I equate this, and I hate comparing people, you're like the Gary Vaynerchuk of the cannabis industry to me. You're still young, you're very successful, you're going to be even more successful, but you've started to throw the ladder back down. And you're telling people, hey, it's hard, but here's the blueprint. You can do it too if you want to be me. What drives you to do that? I mean, you've been very successful. You have a whole lot more to go, but yet you're already starting to put the ladder back down for everybody else.
Well, thank you. That's kind. Honestly, I think it really comes from the fact that I think we all have an obligation that when we get a hand up, we have to extend one down as well. And, I'm a former journalist. We joked about that. And so I just have this natural curiosity about the way things work. And the way that I usually output that is writing. I think we all have our pursuits that we like to do that are sort of a way for us to blow off some steam. And that for me is writing. And so I can have an ability to help and give a hand down because so many people have given me a hand up with simultaneously doing something that I love and I think I might be semi-skilled at, like writing. So I think that's kind of where the rubber meets the road. The other thing I'll say is we're in an industry that is fraught with historical issues such as criminalization and, real issues with social equity and real issues with I'm Latina, with, black and brown people. And so it seems to me like if we're going to go and create generational wealth, which is what we're all trying to do here, we've got to teach other people how to do it too. And I am a firm believer that the way to do that is not a hand out. It is a hand up. And so I try to do that every day.
That's really cool. And that's one of the things I love about this industry and why I want to continue in it is I feel that we're small enough and it's early enough that we can all help each other. And yes, there's competition, but really it's co-opetition, right?
Totally.
And I think that's incredible.
Well, especially for you, and I mean, I'm not just saying this because I'm on the show, but, you have such a hustle about you. From the first time I met you, you kind of went above and beyond and really never took no as an answer from anybody, it seems like, who came across your path. And the beautiful part about that, I think, is then success, it's just a numbers game once you keep grinding the way that you do.
No, a lot of it, I follow guys like Gary Vee and I follow you, and a lot of it was you saying, hey, this is what I love, this is what I love seeing. And I'm just like, well, if she's one of the more successful people in the industry, then she's got to be right. So you have been an inspiration to me, and I'm not going to keep sucking up to you on the show here. But you mentioned that you started out as a journalist, and one of the things that I love about you, and then your colleague Tiffany as well, I forget what you guys called each other, but it was something to do with state schools, because you went to ASU, and of course she went to Florida State, so I got to shout out my Knowles. We've got two in this industry. We've got Kim Rivers, we got Brady Cobb down here in Florida. Tiff, you're a Knoll as well, but you didn't go to Wharton or any of that other stuff. You did go to Georgetown, which is a good school. And then you went into journalism. So how did you take that path from journalism into the investing space?
Sure. Well, we always joke about the public school hustle, I think. Is
public school hustle, that's right.
It's interesting. There's beautiful things about education. My mom is a 30-year special education teacher, so that's near and dear to my heart. But one of the most important things I've found is that education in the traditional sense really seems to have very little correlation with, at least when we've been hiring teams, actual success and output. And so, we've hired people from Harvard and had to fire them, and same thing with Princeton and same thing with Wharton. And what I've found is much more important than where you went to school is how curious are you and what kind of drive do you have? And if you are a curious human with the ability to execute on your curiosity through drive, you'll probably go pretty far. None of this stuff is really rocket science. We're not curing cancer here. We're building out an industry that is in hyper growth mode. And so the way that I got here is probably pretty different because I came, like I said, from a journalism background. I was writing about human trafficking and drug smuggling at the time. And I was a little bit disillusioned with what happens in the news today, which is we wrote about all these stories that were really meaningful and impactful, and then nothing really happened, right?
Yeah.
So really devastating issues of separation and death and destruction, and nothing happened. And so I started to think, well, what actually creates change? And even with all the narratives that we have today around wealth, which are largely negative, what I realized is the only difference between Codie Sanchez, my last name Sanchez, and a Maria Sanchez, who was on the border on the Mexican side, was that I had a better societal background behind me. I had more money from my family perspective, and I was born in the US. And so it just got me thinking, if awareness isn't enough, we're in a super awareness culture, right? Where it's like, no, I want to raise awareness for this, I want to tell my opinion on this, but we're not actually in a creation culture. And so, in my opinion, one of the most, important things I realized early is it wasn't enough to raise awareness. You have to actually create and do something. And the most powerful thing I think you can create is wealth, because then you get to decide where that money goes and what change you want to make.
That's incredible. And it's funny, a good friend of mine, Lisa Morris, and I'll give her a shout out too. She's a self-admitted liberal. She's, very liberal. And when she made her money, she sold her company. She kind of said, I got into capitalism because I could, A, donate it to charity and hope they do something good with it, or I can be an investor and invest the money where I see it's needed in the world. And
Totally.
I think you're on that same page.
I think that's exactly right.
That's very cool. So you go from journalism to investing. Was it directly into cannabis? Was what you were seeing on the border helping you there?
Yeah.
Or was there a pit stop that kind of led you to cannabis? Was it that one investment opportunity? Because everyone I talked to as a lawyer, I got one cannabis client, and that was the domino effect.
Yeah, I'm a long-standing institutional investor, so I've only been in cannabis publicly for 2 years. I've been investing in cannabis since 2014. I was a seed investor in our fund, Entourage Effect, and we tried to get research approved for veterans in Texas and access to cannabis. We failed, but those two things really spurred me into this space. Prior to that, my entire history has really been in emerging markets or an institutional investment. So I did the traditional realm of Goldman Sachs and Vanguard and State Street Global Advisors, all these big, huge asset management firms. And what I found was that if you can draft along the cultural conversation, and if you can draft along a tide with sort of the wind at your back, it's much easier to succeed. And so in cannabis, we saw a couple different things. I saw culturally we were moving towards this market of holistic medicine. We were moving towards a market of plant-based, non-GMO. There's a pushback against things like opioids, rightly so. And in tandem with that, we were seeing this huge tide of money behind cannabis. And I thought, this is a space where you can have generational wealth creation and huge societal impact in one generation. And I think that's really rare to have both of those things.
Yeah, to me, this is an industry, and I come from the family office world, and seeing there's a trend among family offices to do more direct deals in venture and private equity. And to me, it almost seems like a natural transition for them to do that in cannabis, because this is where the opportunities are, right? Do you feel that same? I mean, obviously you feel that same way. You have a fund around it, so.
Yeah, I mean, what we're typically seeing is, well, there's two things happening, which is kind of interesting. One is family office investors typically started going direct first. So some of them might have not gone in 2014, but maybe 2016, 2017, 2018. They went direct. But then what they found is that the cannabis industry is actually wrought with peril. I mean, there's a lot of, we know this all too well. There's a lot of snakes in the grass.
Yeah.
And so if you're not actually in the industry and you know where the snakes are, you can get into trouble. So we actually saw a little bit of a reversion from family offices going direct to then they wanted to go to funds. We took advantage of that. And then they also want to do co-investments with funds. So now they realize it's maybe a little dangerous to just go direct in this space. So we want to go with a fund, and then we want to invest alongside a fund. And so that is one of the most interesting trends I've seen, because usually it's you invest in funds first and then you go direct. And in cannabis it was sort of the other way around.
No, and I agree with that, and I think you guys are doing a great job at Entourage Effect. I know your team, and I love them. I did say I didn't want to get into your market views and everything else, but you said something after the last question that I really love. My wife is an addiction counselor, so I've seen the opiate crisis firsthand, or I've heard stories about it. I haven't seen it. And to me, part of the reason why I love the cannabis industry is the medical side of it, but I think the stigma around the industry and just the overall view of it is the recreational side gets a lot more views. There's more brands. It's out there. It's on Instagram and everything else, because wellness and using cannabis for sickness, I don't know if it's just not sexy. from what you're seeing in the investment market, how is the medical side of things doing? Are we hindered because we can't do research?
Yeah.
And do you believe that it's actually medical cannabis that's going to drive legalization and all the positive things that we want to have in this industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I'm of two minds. I think what will actually drive legalization is again, green, but not cannabis, it's money. What's going to drive legalization are tax dollars that politicians are going to see coming into their communities and them being able to fund programs to get reelected. And that's just how our country works at this stage.
So just on that real quick, seeing the tax dollars, when it is typically a medical state, there are no tax dollars. So when you go rec, there's a lot of tax dollars. So am I wrong? Is recreational going to drive it because it is the money?
Yeah, well, I think it's both. I think politicians will say that medicinal reasons are why they're doing it. They'll say, we're doing this because it's for those that need it for opioid addiction. We're doing it for the young, girl with epilepsy. But what they're really seeing are dollar signs. And at the end of the day, I don't really care why they do it. I just think as long as they understand that, in my opinion, industries are typically better when you can have some regulation, taxation, as opposed to complete banning. We've never once seen an industry in which prohibition seems to work. But we humans are very silly little monkeys that run in circles and forget that we've been there before.
Oh, well, Prohibition did give us organized crime, and after that we got movies like The Godfather and everything else, so I guess
There's
that was
the upside,
something.
yeah.
But, so, to me, you have one of the coolest jobs in the world, right? You, and I'm again going to go back into the suck up mode here, but you get to be an architect of the cannabis industry, and that's you and Matt and Tiff and everybody on your team. You guys are basically architecting the cannabis industry. You're active investors. What's a day in the life of Codie Sanchez like? Is it as awesome as I think it is, or is it just the grass is greener?
I think it's probably all of us just responding to emails all the time until Sunday or something, which is how it feels like half the time. But what is amazing is when you invest. People are sort of funny about venture capital and private equity, and they think that there's something bad about those two industries. But in fact, what you're doing is supplying tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or millions of jobs, and you get to pick the founders who you believe will create a world that you want to live in, right? Because the way that we consume really drives the way that we live. And so, yes, I do think at a high level, the great part is exactly what you said. At a base level, this industry, we're basically blocking and tackling all day, right? So we have 65 portfolio companies that we've invested in. 27 of them are in Fund 2. We're raising our third fund, so I don't know, we'll have like 15 or 20 in that fund as well. And so half the day is spent running around talking to our investors. Half the day is spent putting out fires with our portfolio companies. Then probably half the day is spent sort of learning in environments like these where we get to sit, take a step back, and actually think strategically about the industry.
That's really cool. So you'd mentioned just on your panel before, again, we are at Benzinga, that you guys are very, very active investors. When you look at a company, is one of the deciding factors, hey, if we plug this into our ecosystem, they're going to be huge, or I know this person, if I make that introduction, they're well worth investing. Is what you can do for them also part of that decision?
100%. I mean, it shouldn't be the only thing. These need to be companies that theoretically could work on their own unless we're bringing in operating partners to take over the company and run it, which sometimes we do. But so they need to be self-sufficient, but no doubt the word entourage effect, I mean, you know this, but it basically means the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And so we are very big about creating a platform of companies across the space. For instance, I was just talking about Sublime on stage, and Sublime has one of the #1 pre-rolls out there in California, and so we were able to get Sublime into most of the top dispensaries in California. And you can take a company that's doing 10 million in revenue and get them to 20 or 30 pretty quick if you were invested in all the big MSOs originally, and we were invested in a lot of them.
Yeah. So on that point, so the MSOs right now, I guess there's a lot of negative press around them, and some have done a very good job. But like you said, a lot of them went for market share, and now they're out of cash. Are we at a point right now where the MSOs that are household names right now may not be around for the near future, or at least not in the form that they're in now? They're going to be acquired or rebranded or anything. And is it the companies that bootstrapped within their states and kind of said, hey, we're going to focus on our state, we're going to get sales, we're going to get profitable, and now at this point with everything being somewhat distressed, now they have the chance to pounce? Are those the MSOs of the future and the brands that are going to be household names, or is that where we're going to see our Budweiser or our Bud Light come from?
Yeah, I mean,
I know it's hard for you because you have a lot of investments there. So this is every company that EEC is not a part of.
Yeah. I think that there'll be a couple things. One, I'm very worried about companies that don't have 12 months of cash. So if you're a big MSO out there and you're burning cash like crazy and you don't have 12 months of capital, I'm concerned. I think you should raise capital. It's why you're seeing deals like the deal Acreage just did, the deal Ascend just did. So that's one half of it. On the other hand, there's a lot of small dispensary operators inside individual states that are doing like $10 million in revenue. But the problem is are they differentiated? Can they get outside of the state? Do they have enough capital to do it? This is becoming a very capitally intensive businesses. I think the MSOs that survive are the ones that have enough money to do it and actually have SOPs where they're getting close to profitability, like a True Leaf, let's say.
So, and Kim, hopefully you'll watch this, and I know you're going to do our show eventually. We're really looking forward to that. What I was going to say, and I kind of forgot my point there, was we'll come back to that actually. So going back to the job, because I lost my train of thought, and we can edit this out if you're not comfortable talking about it. I know you're a very important figure. Are you a cannabis user? Is this part of the reason why you're in there? Yeah. Do you use it in your daily life? Because part of what I want to do with this podcast is show, listen, it's not a bunch of lazy stoners. People use cannabis for not everybody needs to smoke an entire gram joint. Some people will take a hit or two just to feel kind of baseline. Are you a user? And if you're not comfortable talking about it, we don't have to worry about it.
I mean, well, first of all, if you're in this industry, I think you should want to use some aspect
or at least try it.
Yeah. So I would say, like most people, I started with CBD creams. So I'm an athlete. My significant other's in the military, special forces, and so he was always talking about all these different different products that you could use to help with recovery. And one of the things the military cannot use is CBD. So I started explaining and experimenting with it, and he still can't. He'll be out soon, so he can. So I started there. Then I'm not like a big cannabis user as far as from a daily perspective, but I love some of the microdose products. Like we have Can, which is a very small, sort of like a social tonic, so like a Perrier, but has cannabis inside of it, 2.5 milligrams. So I would totally sip on that instead of a glass of wine, right? And I definitely see the case for edibles for sleeping when I'm on red eyes like I was last night. So those are the scenarios in which I use it. I'm not a huge recreational user of it. I would say I'm more of a wellness user. And the reason I think that is because, and this industry is figuring this out, it's hard to figure out dosing still. So I think as the industry gets better at that, I might become more of a user, because I know if I have one glass of wine, how I'm going to feel. I don't always know that with cannabis products.
And I think that, to me, that's actually, to me, is the future of our industry, is actually the lower doses, the lower THCs.
Totally agree.
Like someone who's drinking a beer, and you can go anywhere from 1 to 9 before you go from a buzz to go home, leave your keys, right? But when you go into a dispensary, and I'm going to call out California as I typically do, the bud tenders seem to push you to whoever the highest THC product is. Do you, is that what you guys are looking for? What are the smaller doses? Is this, and are you looking for more wellness-based investments over just pure recreational, we're making stuff that's going to knock you out?
Oh, 100%. I think you're crazy if right now you are looking at historical consumers in cannabis and choosing those products. Now, there'll be a space for those, just like in any other industry, but, a 60 milligram bottle of cannabis wine, to me, is not how consumers are going to consume. They're going to want small, microdose, controllable, and in fact, there's lots of great data by BDS Analytics, who's one of the best data companies out there. We invested in them, that tell you exactly what consumers want. So consumers are already starting to tell us they're not interested in having the one experience that everybody's had with an edible where, you're thinking you're never going to touch cannabis again. They don't want to experience that. And so I think, the Chardonnay PTA mom in the future probably starts incorporating cannabis instead in a way that is super dosable.
No, that's very cool. My biggest problem with the edible companies is some of these companies should just go straight into food and beverage because they make phenomenal baked goods and everything else. But, you got to know your limits there. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about in this industry is historically a lot of funds popped up around ancillary services, service providers, and they were not, quote unquote, investing in plant touching. You guys didn't really take that path. We're at a point right now where the industry is a little bit cash starved. I think the money's getting smarter. But to me, I look at that, are the plant touching businesses now safer investments? Disregard the fact that it's federally illegal, but that if they don't have money, the service providers are not getting paid, right?
That's a great point.
is plant touching the safer bet now?
Yeah. Well, I do think we've never liked Bandaid businesses. So like somebody once asked me, who's going to be the Oracle of cannabis? And I was like, Oracle. And so
I think I stole that line from you.
Yeah,
Actually, I was wondering where I got it from.
Now you know.
Sorry.
So we don't like Bandaid businesses, which I think a lot of those ancillary services are.
Yeah.
Lots of people pitch me, we're going to be the next HR of cannabis, or we're going to be the next big consulting firm of cannabis, and all of that is great. But I don't think we'll have the venture style returns that we're looking to have, since we target 3 to 5x. I don't know if I think they're safer, but I do think that people who didn't invest in cannabis plant touching early, they missed out. I mean, the returns that we were able to make in the first 2 funds are because we were willing to take the risk in this environment, and a lot of people just are not.
Awesome. Well, I think you guys are doing amazing. You guys are doing great stuff in the industry. I know you guys are a big part of ArcView too.
Yeah.
I actually just learned, and I feel weird for not knowing this, that the ArcView funds feed up into you guys now.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So was that from your involvement, your investment in ArcView? Is that how that progressed?
Yeah, so ArcView is a little bit of a turnaround. They were, a great company that was started for incredible reasons, activism in the space. And, we came into ArcView and said, we think we could level up this company with the right operating partner. And so what we started to see is that the industry was moving towards growth equity, like our fund now. We invest in companies later stage, and there's a huge gaping hole in seed stage. And so ArcView can fill that hole, and then we can continue to carry on a company all the way from seed to IPO. And so that is the goal.
That's awesome. I mean, it's like your AA, AAA league, and you guys get to be the big show. So
I think that's the